At exactly 4 a.m., the streets of downtown San Francisco were still blanketed in darkness, interrupted only by flickering street lamps and the occasional distant hum of a streetcar. Ryan Mitchell sat in his rental car, staring at the reflection in the rearview mirror. Gone were his tailored suits, replaced by faded jeans and a grey hoodie. His hair, usually styled to perfection, had been deliberately tousled, and a few days of stubble framed his normally clean-shaven jawline. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was strategic. As the CEO of Sunrise Artisan Breads, Ryan had built a thriving brand over the past 15 years, expanding from a tiny neighborhood bakery to a national chain with dozens of locations. But now something felt off. Quarterly reports were troubling. Profit margins were shrinking and staff turnover was soaring. Despite the company's public success, something inside the organization was quietly crumbling. Consultants had been hired, reports filed, but none of it explained why the company's flagship location, once the heart of Sunrise's success, was underperforming. So Ryan made a decision to go undercover, to stop watching from above and start observing from within. At 4:45 a.m., Ryan approached the entrance of the flagship store, its brick facade dimly lit by the warm glow coming from within. The official prep time didn't start for another 15 minutes, but through the large window pane he could already see movement inside. A lone woman worked behind the counter, her auburn hair tied tightly in a bun, her arms moving with hypnotic grace as she folded dough with a rhythm that suggested both mastery and familiarity. Even from a distance, Ryan could tell this wasn't just routine, it was art. The woman whom he would later learn was Emily Carter. Didn't glance up once as she continued her silent ballet of flour, butter, and thyme. Moments later, the assistant manager arrived and unlocked the front door, greeting Ryan, now going by his alias, Lucas, with a polite smile and a quick handshake. "You must be the new trainee from corporate," he said. Ryan nodded with practiced awkwardness. "Thanks for bringing me in last minute." The manager waved it off. "Corporate's been sending folks all over lately, trying to tighten up standards." Ryan took note that standardization initiative had been his idea, clearly not universally welcomed. As the morning progressed, Ryan was given a crash course on the bakery's daily operations. He was taught how to load the mixers, stock the display cases, and manage the point-of-sale system. But no matter what he was doing, his eyes kept drifting to Emily. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had long mastered her craft. Her hands, dusted with flour, seemed to dance across the marble counter, shaping croissants with the kind of care that couldn't be taught in a workshop. She didn't speak much, didn't engage with the rest of the team, and didn't once take a break. Not even when offered. Ryan was intrigued. She was clearly the engine behind the store's most successful products, and yet she seemed detached from the rest of the staff, working as though the kitchen were her personal sanctuary. Every time a new batch of her croissants emerged from the oven, the scent would fill the store and draw customers like clockwork, and every time they sold out before the next tray was even finished. During a lull in the afternoon, Ryan found a chance to ask the assistant manager about her. "Emily's a bit of a legend around here," he said quietly. "Those croissants. People come from all over the city, just for them. But she's different. Keeps to herself, doesn't talk much, doesn't hang out after shifts. And get this, she's turned down promotions multiple times." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't want to be head baker." The manager shook his head. "Nope. Says she prefers being on the floor, just wants to bake. No management duties, no leadership, just hands in the dough." That didn't add up. Talented workers usually chased upward mobility, especially in a growing company like Sunrise. But Emily wasn't just another skilled employee. She was the cornerstone of the location's reputation. Still, she showed no interest in recognition or reward. Ryan made a mental note. This wasn't just an employee with a passion. This was someone with a purpose. By closing time, Ryan was exhausted. His back ached, his feet throbbed, and his hands were sore from carrying trays and lifting sacks of flour. But Emily, who had started hours before him, showed no signs of fatigue. Instead, she stayed late scrubbing down ovens and organizing ingredients for the next morning. When asked why she insisted on doing the heavy cleanup alone, she simply replied, "It has to be done right." She then exited the back door alone, bypassing the others who headed out for drinks or dinner. Curious, Ryan followed from a discreet distance and watched as she unlocked a beat-up bicycle chained to a streetlight. No car, no Uber, just a backpack strapped tightly and a determined look in her eye as she pedaled off into the night. Back in his hotel room, Ryan reviewed the notes he had taken on his phone. The store's workflow was efficient and customer satisfaction remained high. But the numbers didn't lie. This store's profits didn't match its popularity. Something or someone was absorbing the excess, and it all seemed to center around Emily. She worked longer hours than anyone else, produced the top-selling items, and refused any financial or managerial advancement. It didn't make sense on paper, but Ryan was beginning to realize Emily Carter wasn't on a career path. She was on a mission. What kind of mission, though, he couldn't yet say. All he knew was that her story wasn't just unusual, it was the key to unlocking what had been eating away at Sunrise Artisan Breads from the inside, and tomorrow he would begin to unravel it. By his second full day at the Sunrise Artisan Bread's flagship store, Ryan Mitchell had begun to understand just how relentless Emily Carter truly was. She was already deep into her baking routine when he arrived at 4:50 a.m., the kitchen lights casting a warm glow across her work table. The scent of butter and yeast lingered in the air, but even that comforting aroma couldn't distract Ryan from the exhaustion he now carried in his own bones. Yet Emily, who had been working longer hours than anyone, moved with the same unwavering focus, as before, her every motion purposeful. She declined every break offered. When Miguel, the head baker, suggested she sit for even 5 minutes, she simply shook her head and continued folding dough. It wasn't just dedication, it was compulsion. She was pushing herself with a level of discipline Ryan had rarely seen, and he'd spent years managing some of the most driven professionals in the food industry. This wasn't the energy of someone chasing a promotion or preparing for a review. This was the quiet desperation of someone who couldn't afford to stop. Curious about her background and sensing something far deeper at play, Ryan took advantage of a short break to slip into the manager's office, while Sarah, the store lead, was distracted with a delivery. The employee files were open on the computer, an oversight Ryan made note to correct later in his capacity as CEO. But for now, it was an opportunity. Emily's emergency contact was listed as Matthew Carter, same last name. When Ryan ran the name through a secure internal search tool linked to public databases, he found a death certificate dated 7 years prior. Cause of death: vehicular accident, likely due to driver fatigue. The timing struck him. 7 years ago was around the same time Emily had first joined Sunrise. The further he dug, the clearer the timeline became. Emily had once co-owned a bakery with her brother Carter & Co., located in the city's North End. Reviews were glowing. A local food blogger had even called their sourdough life-changing. But then came the recession, a failed renovation, and a mysterious fire that gutted the place. Ryan's chest tightened, a financial collapse, and a sibling's sudden death. No wonder she worked like she was carrying the weight of the world. What made it worse, what twisted in Ryan's gut, was the trail of payments he discovered tied to her payroll. Every month, a portion of Emily's wages was automatically funneled to Brookstone Capital, a financial services firm he recognized. It was infamous in small business circles for issuing high-interest loans with crushing repayment terms. A deeper look confirmed his fear. Carter & Co. had taken a substantial loan from Brookstone just before the fire, and ever since Matthew's death, Emily had been the one paying it back. She wasn't just working to make ends meet, she was working to outrun the ghosts of her past, shouldering a debt that wasn't even legally hers. It explained everything. Her refusal to take vacations, her rejection of promotions, her obsession with perfecting each loaf and pastry. She wasn't trying to climb a ladder. She was trying to climb out of a pit. That afternoon, after most of the staff had gone home, Ryan found her alone in the kitchen, scrubbing down the massive mixers with painstaking care. "You know we have a cleaning crew for that," he said casually. She barely looked up. I prefer to do it myself. Some things you can't trust to shortcuts." He nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but inside a storm was gathering. Emily's work ethic, which the company had long admired, was in reality a quiet scream for help, one no one had thought to hear. And what troubled Ryan more than anything was that despite being the engine behind one of Sunrise's most successful locations, she hadn't received a single bonus, not even when her croissants led sales across the region. She wasn't just overlooked, she had been buried. Later that night, Ryan returned to his hotel room, but couldn't shake the image of her hands rough, calloused, marked with tiny burns from years of labor. He sat at the edge of his bed, opened his laptop, and began digging into archived files. He wanted to know more about Carter and Co., more about the fire, more about Matthew. What he found made his blood run cold. In a business development folder from 8 years prior, he stumbled upon a submission proposal. The sender, Matthew Carter. It contained a detailed sourdough fermentation process down to the grain composition and timing adjustments, almost identical to the Formula Sunrise artisan breads now used for its heirloom sourdough, the company's second highest selling product. Ryan's hands froze over the keyboard. He remembered that product launch he'd approved the rollout. But the formula had supposedly come from Stephen Lang, their former VP of Product Development, who had left the company under a cloud of misconduct 5 years ago. Was it possible had Sunrise unknowingly built part of its empire on stolen work? In the early hours of the following morning, Ryan made his way to the store again, arriving before even Emily. He stood in the stillness of the empty kitchen, surrounded by flour bins and proofing trays, wrestling with everything he had just uncovered. If Matthew's formula had indeed been taken, then Emily's pain, her exhaustion, her silence, her self-isolation was not only rooted in grief and debt. It was compounded by the cruel irony that the very company she now worked for had profited off her family's legacy without credit, without compensation, without acknowledgement. The burden behind her talent wasn't just emotional, it was institutional. And as the door opened and Emily entered, once again beginning her pre-dawn ritual in solitude, Ryan made a quiet vow. The truth would not stay buried much longer. The truth, when it came, landed like a punch to the chest. Ryan Mitchell had spent hours cross-referencing records, scanning through archived emails, and rereading proposal after proposal, each time hoping the data would somehow prove him wrong, but it didn't. Buried deep in Sunrise Artisan Bread's business development archives, filed under a nondescript folder dated 8 years back, was a submission proposal from Matthew Carter Emily's late brother. It outlined a sourdough fermentation process unlike anything Ryan had seen before in external proposals, a unique blend of heritage grains, a precise hydration formula, and a multi-stage proofing cycle that optimized both crust and crumb. As he read through the document again, it became impossible to ignore the parallels to the company's current bestseller, Heirloom Sourdough, a product now stocked in every Sunrise location and credited with driving nearly 20% of regional sales. The shocking part wasn't just the similarity in concept, it was the near-identical match in process and formulation. Matthew had submitted it, but someone else had taken the credit. That someone was Stephen Lang, Sunrise's former VP of Product Development. Ryan remembered Lang well, charming, confident, always armed with a silver tongue and a polished slide deck. Lang had presented the heirloom sourdough formula as his own breakthrough shortly after the Carter proposal had been formally declined. The timing now seemed far too convenient. Ryan dug deeper, finding the original rejection email sent to Matthew, cold, formal boilerplate. But just 2 weeks after that rejection, an internal communication from Lang appeared in the executive inboxes, touting an innovative, heritage-based formula ready for rollout. Ryan checked the metadata. It was all there, the timelines aligned perfectly. Then came the bonuses, substantial financial incentives awarded to Lang over the following fiscal year for the success of the product. Bonuses earned from work that wasn't his. And all the while, Emily Carter had been waking before dawn, folding dough, and quietly paying off a debt left behind by the man whose idea had fueled that very success. It was nearly 4:30 a.m. when Ryan closed his laptop, his heart pounding. The kitchen was still empty, lit only by the early glow of pre-dawn. When Emily entered 10 minutes later, carrying her small backpack and heading straight to the prep station. As always, Ryan made a decision. This masquerade his undercover identity as Lucas had gone far enough. He took a deep breath and approached her, watching as she measured flour with a precision born of repetition and instinct. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said softly. Emily didn't look up, but her hands paused ever so slightly. "Depends on the question," she replied. "The tattoo on your wrist? The flame? What does it mean?" Her movement stilled completely. Her face tightened before she composed herself again. "It's to remember something I lost," she said, voice quiet. "Something that can't be rebuilt. A bakery," Ryan ventured. That stopped her cold. She turned, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "How do you Carter & Co?" he said gently. "Your brother Matthew's place." The room fell silent, except for the low hum of refrigeration units. Slowly, Emily stepped back, the rolling pin she'd been holding clattering to the counter. "Who are you?" Her voice was steady, but her posture braced for impact. Ryan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. "My name isn't Lucas, it's Ryan Mitchell. I'm the CEO of Sunrise Artisan Breads." Emily blinked, stunned. He unfolded the paper and placed it on the work table between them. "This is the proposal. Your brother submitted to Sunrise 8 years ago. It was rejected in writing, but his exact formulation was later introduced to the company under a different name by one of our executives. That product, heirloom sourdough, has made us millions." Emily's face paled as she scanned the document, her eyes lingering on Matthew's signature at the bottom. Her lips parted, but no words came. "Stephen Lang took credit for your brother's work," Ryan continued. "He left the company years ago, but the damage remains, and you've been paying for it literally ever since." She sank onto a nearby stool, her flour-covered hands trembling. "Matthew said the proposal was rejected. He got a letter cold and dismissive. He was devastated. That's why he took the loan. He wanted to prove his work mattered." Her voice broke. He believed they didn't see any value in it. Ryan's throat tightened. "We saw the value," he said bitterly. "We just gave the credit to the wrong man." For a long moment, they sat in silence. Emily stared at the proposal, her face a canvas of grief, disbelief and fury. Ryan studied her. The lines under her eyes etched deeper than any sleepless night could account for. This woman, this artist, had spent nearly a decade baking under the weight of guilt, debt, and stolen legacy, and until now, no one had even thought to question it. But Ryan wasn't finished. "I'm not just here to apologize," he said, pulling out a second document, a spreadsheet. "This is a revenue breakdown of every dollar earned from the heirloom sourdough line since it launched. A conservative estimate puts its value at over $4,2 million. That's what your brother's formula generated. That's what your family's legacy built." Emily didn't respond, but tears had begun to slip down her cheeks, silent and unacknowledged. Her body shook with the weight of the truth. "And here," Ryan continued, sliding another paper across the table, "is the clause from the original submission form. Matthew signed. It states that any accepted formulation must be compensated. We failed him. And we failed you." Emily reached out and touched the page as if it were something fragile and sacred. In that quiet moment, surrounded by flour bins and cooling racks, it wasn't just injustice that hung in the air. It was the first flicker of something else. Recognition, redemption. The bakery felt different that morning. The usual hum of early morning preparation still filled the air. Flour dusted the countertops, mixers whirred softly, and the warm scent of rising dough drifted through the kitchen. But a weightier energy lingered beneath it all. Ryan Mitchell had barely slept. The moment he'd stepped out of that emotional conversation with Emily, he knew what had to come next. No corporate cover-up, no polite delay. The injustice that had gone unaddressed for nearly a decade had to be faced head-on. Within an hour, he'd sent a company-wide directive to convene an emergency board meeting. The subject line was blunt intellectual property violation, immediate resolution. Required by 9:00 a.m., the flagship store's office was crowded. Confused regional managers whispered nervously. Senior staff stood stiffly with arms crossed, and a hastily set-up monitor displayed the faces of Sunrise's board members, all blinking into their webcams, caught off guard by the sudden urgency. Ryan stood at the front, flanked by Emily, who sat quietly beside him in her apron, eyes downcast, hands folded in her lap. As the meeting began, Ryan didn't waste a second. 8 years ago, he began this company, built one of its most successful products on the stolen innovation of a young baker named Matthew Carter. He submitted a sourdough proposal that was formally rejected, only to have its exact formulation introduced months later under a different name by then VP Stephen Lang. That product, our heirloom sourdough, has earned this company millions. And while we celebrated, Matthew died in financial ruin. His sister, Emily Carter, who now sits beside me, has worked in our kitchens every day since paying off the debt that decision created. A stunned silence followed his words. Some of the regional leaders shifted awkwardly. A few of the board members, like CFO Marcus Bryant, shook their heads, visibly alarmed. Others simply stared, stunned by the sudden reckoning. Ryan clicked to the next slide, a side-by-side comparison of Matthew's original proposal and the internal documentation for the heirloom line. The data was damning. I'm not here to debate what happened. The evidence is irrefutable. I'm here to propose 3 actions. First, Sunrise Artisan Breads will immediately pay off the remaining balance of Emily Carter's loan to Brookstone Capital. Second, we will offer retroactive compensation for the use of Matthew Carter's formula, fair market value, based on performance benchmarks. Third, effective today, Emily Carter will be offered the position of Head of Artisan Development with full creative authority and profit-sharing options. Before the board could respond, he added, "This is not just about money. It's about integrity. It's about the values this brand claims to stand for: community, craftsmanship, and respect." He stepped back, letting the room breathe as the weight of his proposal settled over the call. Before any of the board members could speak, Emily rose quietly to her feet. Her voice, when it came, was calm and resolute. "I appreciate everything Mr. Mitchell has offered," she said, addressing the camera directly, "but I don't want millions. I don't want to be paid to make this disappear. What I want is recognition for my brother, for the work he poured his soul into. I want his name restored, and I want protections put in place, so no other small baker loses their legacy the way we did." Her words cut through the tension like a knife. "I've worked in silence for 8 years because I thought I had no choice. But today, I realize that speaking out, asking for dignity, is a choice too." The room fell completely still. Even the most hardened executives couldn't meet her gaze. CFO Marcus Bryant cleared his throat, then muttered, "She's right." Chairwoman Evelyn Shaw, known for her meticulous control of boardroom conversations, finally leaned in toward her camera. "Miss Carter," she said, her tone softer than usual, "thank you for your clarity. You've given us more than just truth. You've given us a path forward." The board requested a 30-minute closed session. During that time, Ryan and Emily waited in the break room, sipping lukewarm coffee in silence. She stared out the window, not saying much, though her knuckles remained white around her cup. When the board reconvened, Evelyn delivered the final decision. "We've reached a consensus. Sunrise Artisan Breads will immediately pay off your outstanding loan in full. We will also establish the Matthew Carter Memorial Trust, a $2 million fund to support young independent bakers and entrepreneurs. Finally, we extend our formal offer for you, Miss Carter, to lead our new artisan division. You will have full creative authority, oversight of development, and a profit-sharing stake in any product launched under your direction." Emily didn't speak right away. She blinked, clearly overwhelmed, then glanced at Ryan, who simply nodded in quiet support. And Evelyn added, "We would like to rename the heirloom sourdough collection to the Carter Heritage line, with Matthew Carter's name listed as its original creator. It's time we gave credit where credit is long overdue." Around the screen, the other directors nodded in agreement. Even Bryant, who'd once raised concerns about legal exposure, offered a subdued, "It's the right thing." Ryan watched as Emily finally exhaled. Really exhaled, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for years. Her hands, which had trembled through the entire meeting, slowly steadied. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice laced with exhaustion and something deeper: peace. As the meeting concluded, Ryan lingered in the now empty room. Emily stood silently beside him, staring at the closed laptop screen where her brother's name had just been restored to history. For years, she had carried a legacy in silence, hidden behind ovens and flour and early mornings. But now the silence had been broken. Justice hadn't come quickly, but it had come. And from this moment forward, Sunrise Artisan Breads would carry not just the flavor of heritage, but the truth of it too. 6 months had passed since the morning that changed everything, since truth was spoken aloud in the heart of Sunrise. Artisan breads and a legacy long buried was finally brought to light. Now the flagship store in San Francisco bore a new name over its doorway: Carter and Sunrise Bakery. The sleek brushed steel sign shimmered in the morning light, but what truly drew the eye was the bronze plaque just inside the entrance. It read, "In memory of Matthew Carter Baker, dreamer, innovator. His passion lives on in every loaf we bake." Customers often paused to read it, some wiping their eyes, others smiling quietly before stepping inside for their morning ritual. And each time they bit into a slice of sourdough or a perfectly flaky croissant, they were tasting not just a product, but a story reclaimed. At the heart of it all was Emily Carter, transformed in ways both subtle and profound. No longer the quiet woman working alone in the shadows before dawn, she now led the Carter Heritage Collection, a new artisan line celebrated not just for its exquisite flavors, but for its mission. Each bread, each pastry was inspired by the recipes she and Matthew had once experimented with in their tiny home kitchen. But beyond the bread itself, Emily's role had expanded into something far greater. She oversaw a mentorship program housed within the flagship store, offering guidance tools and kitchen space to struggling independent bakers. Young artisans from across the region applied to learn under her leadership, and Emily, once so afraid of the spotlight, now stood with quiet confidence before audiences, teaching, mentoring, and reminding each baker that their voice, their craft, their story mattered. Inside the newly renovated bakery, changes were both structural and soulful. A glass wall allowed customers to peer directly into the kitchen, watching bakers at work, proofing dough-shaping loaves, testing small batch creations. The atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just a store anymore, it was a sanctuary. Staff morale soared. Sales increased. More importantly, something intangible had been restored: trust. The staff, who once saw Emily as distant, now admired her as a leader who had walked through fire and emerged carrying the torch for others. Ryan Mitchell, who visited often but quietly, preferred to observe from the background, watching the legacy he had once unknowingly endangered now bloom under the right hands. He had made good on every promise to Emily, and she had more than delivered in return. But perhaps the most profound moment came one sunny afternoon, unannounced and quiet, with no press, no cameras, no board meetings. Ryan had just wrapped up a strategy session at headquarters and decided to stop by a small corner cafe he used to frequent in his early days as a founder. As he stepped inside, a familiar figure caught his eye. There by the window sat Emily. She wore a soft denim jacket and no apron, her hair down for once, a book in one hand and a pastry in the other. A croissant, but not one she had baked. It came from the cafe's display. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and simply smiled, not to analyze the layers or critique the lamination, but to enjoy it, purely, quietly. For the first time in years, she was savoring something not out of obligation or duty, but because she wanted to. Ryan stood still, letting the moment imprint itself in his mind. She was free. That ordinary yet extraordinary scene, the woman who once baked to survive, now choosing to taste life, was the true measure of everything they had worked for. Ryan didn't approach her. He didn't need to. Their eyes met for a moment through the glass, and she raised her coffee cup in a small, knowing toast. He returned the gesture with a simple nod and turned to leave, carrying that image with him. Behind him, the bakery continued to hum with life students shaping dough with wonder in their eyes, customers reading the plaque by the door, and the scent of warm bread wrapping around them like a promise. The name Carter, once erased, now stood tall, and Emily finally stood tall with it. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet heroes working behind the scenes every day, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful, true-to-life narratives where truth triumphs, legacies are restored, and ordinary people rise to extraordinary heights. Share this video to keep these voices heard and leave a comment below, because your perspective might be the spark that changes someone else's story. Let's honor resilience, celebrate justice, and build a community where every story matters.